Welcome to the Financial Services Club webinar on APP fraud, UK government and UK Supreme Court at odds. My name is John Bertrand. I'll be chairing it for the next 45 minutes. My background is in banking and technology, and I've been there about 30 years, so I quite like it. Anyway, our sponsors today are as you see, we go from platinum to contribution, and it is the Financial Services Club and also the YZ Group. What I'd like to talk to you today, or what we're going to talk to you today with the panel, is the UK Supreme Court's landmark case ruling that banks must make payments once authorised by the bank account holder. The issue is, if Mickey Mouse is put on the name of account with any sort code and account number, then that payment will be made. The funds are almost impossible to recover once the scammer has been found, as the scammers have instantly moved that money away. The UK government is deeply concerned about the rising levels of faster payment frauds, and through the Payment Services Regulator is taking measures to ensure reimbursement to consumers and SMEs, but not large companies, continues. This they're going to do by the confirmation of pay COP, which is going to be used by all banks and payments providers in the UK through 2024. In 2022, £500 million was scammed, and the voluntary bank reimbursement scheme paid out £200 million. Under the law, this could go to zero. We are looking at the growing move to instant payments worldwide and what needs to happen to fraud payments, with input from Nigel, who is an expert witness in the landmark case. We will give it, and he will give insight in how the ruling took place and why. Alon, who's ex-SWIFT and co-founder of IPID, and will take us through the move to cross-border payments. Gillimore, who is a corporate treasurer, will share his experience and thoughts on how companies will adapt. And Andy, who is knowledgeable on data, selects possibly the best instant payment choice. This will be followed by a panel discussion with questions from you. Okay, let's start with the UK market, slide 1. Here, as you see, in the survey, 77% of consumers liked faster payments. This can be seen in the 25% annual growth rates over the last 2 years. Unfortunately, scams are so extensive, they now exceed burglary in 2021 and credit card fraud in 2022. The number of cases over 4 years exceeds 1 million, and very, very few scammers are caught. In fact, 700 scams a day go unresolved. Before the mobile, most banks would see a few thousand scams, mainly checks. Scams and investigations cost over $1 billion a year, and this does not take into consideration the emotional and physical and psychological impact on the victims. Now let's have a look at slide 2 for the international part. Here, as they say, the European Union is going for it. In 2024, they're going to have a mandated instant payment scheme. They're also going to have mandate confirmation of payee, and then EBA clearing is gearing up for request to pay and fraud pattern anomaly detection center. The EU currently instant payments equals about 11% of the payment volume. This is planned to treble. The US, interestingly, has gone live with FedNow, which is their equivalent of faster payments. Here it's with 35 banks and credit unions, and in time it'll reach over 9,000 institutions. Australia, an early advocate of instant payments, has announced a 30 million anti-scam centre. A forecast of scams in the US, UK, and India will exceed 4 billion by 2026. Given this backdrop, Nigel will take us through the Supreme court rulings and why? Nigel?
Good morning, everybody. First of all, a little bit about some personal experience I've had in the last few weeks. I'm not going to name the bank I use, of course, but I had occasion to make 2 faster payments to a member of my family, both in the region of £15,000. And I logged on to internet banking as per normal, and immediately I authorized the first payment. I got a message from my bank saying, please phone the fraud department. And they went through a series of questions, which I had to answer before they would release the payment, which I thought was a very good move. The guy who I was speaking to said he was making notes for the file. And then the following day, I made another payment of about £15,000 and got a similar guy from the fraud department speaking to me. But it certainly seemed as though nobody had made any notes about my previous conversation the previous day. But it was quite an interesting conversation. He even asked at one stage, was I lying? Another stage, he asked if I used TeamViewer, for example. So they were pretty thorough. But anyway, both payments were released eventually. And then I made this last weekend a further payment of £10,000. And on this occasion, nothing happened whatsoever. The faster payment went straight through. So it's quite evident that the banks are trying to do something to reduce the risk of payment fraud. The only problem is, of course, is that customers are not always willing to cooperate with the banks. They do try to do the education, and they've been doing this education for I don't know how long, 10 years or more, probably. But of course, customers are not the most willing people to read the education and pay attention to it. I don't think this is anything new at all. So the next slide, please. So the famous case this summer, and I was an expert witness in this case when it went first to the Crown Court. I haven't been involved with it since. It went to the Appeal Court and to the Supreme Court. I presume this is that they were quite satisfied with the evidence which I gave. It is a very sad case, in reality, involving Mr. and Mrs. Phillip. They were totally taken in by this fraudster who was very, very clever. And they just basically did as they were told, despite the fact that they were advised not to do it by not only the police, but also their friends as well. But they took Barclays to court. I forget the exact sequence of events, but they won at the Court of Appeal, but Barclays then went to the Supreme Court, and bearing in mind they were involved in the previous big case, I'm not surprised at this at all. Basically what happened was that this scammer persuaded them to move a lot of their savings to a safe account, guess where, in the Middle East, in fact into the United Arab Emirates. And of course that money disappeared as quickly as it was moved into the Middle East, because it was basically just the scammers' accounts which were credited, and then they moved the money on. And anybody with any experience in this sort of thing, so for example, I was involved in another case which was where a mule account was being used, which was based at NatWest Bank. And of course, the money came in that case, similarly, about $5 million came in and went out virtually the same day all around the world. And the bank lost the case. So a lot of this is going on. I've got another case going on at the moment as well, whereby a couple are moving a house up in the Midlands. The house is worth it's going to cost them about 1.5 million. It's and they were scammed. Their emails were intercepted, and the customer got an fraudulent email from the scammer, telling them to move the completion monies to another bank account. Same sort of thing. So this is, as John has explained, this is rife at the moment. But the case of Philip versus Barclays, the Supreme Court have narrowed down the responsibility of the banks in terms of the quince care duty of care to such a degree that I think a lot of banks will be breathing a sigh of relief, number one. And number two, I think a lot of the cases I'm involved with at the moment will disappear because the barristers and the solicitors will be recommending that the customers do not take the bank's or taking the bank's side. The other thing about this, very, very quickly, the other thing which is relevant is that I asked my bank's fraud department if they were aware of this case, to which they both said no. So I really question how well the fraud departments are being trained in this sort of thing. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Now, Alan, to take us through cross-border payments.
Thank you, John. Just a few remarks that I'd like to make about the evolution of cross-border payments. First, by saying that I think it's fair to say also that I mean, the banks have moved a long way to make cross-border payments and domestic payments a lot more efficient than they used to be. I remember my early days at SWIFT more than 25 years ago. International payments was usually taking more than 3 or 4 days to reaching the final recipients. And nowadays, what you see is that those payments, through many different initiatives that I will come back to in a minute, are actually making cross-border payments a lot faster. Now, at the same time, we still believe at iPaid and with many of my colleagues in the industry as well, that there's still actually some key issues that payments industries have to fix. One, that is about the poor customer experience, right? Yes, you've seen a lot of evolution when it comes to domestic payments, but when it comes to cross-border payments, you still have this sort of anxiety, perhaps sometimes also sitting at the level of corporate treasurers or individual or retail clients, about making cross-border payments and not really being sure that the money will reach actually to the final recipients. Two, what we talked just about just a minute ago, scams, frauds are on the rise. It feels a little bit like there is actually, once you see that the payments industry is becoming a lot more efficient, and by efficient I mean fast and cheaper eventually, you see actually fraud on the rise as well, because as you mentioned, Nigel, when the money is gone, it's gone. It goes actually a lot faster than before. And it's very, very, very difficult effectively to get it back. And then still you have too many payments failing, right? Depending on where you are, we see, because sometimes miskeying of a digit in the account number or things like that. But you see that sometimes, I mean, in many countries domestically, you still have about between 3 to 6% of the payments failing. And then when it comes to actually cross-border payments, you see two-digit numbers, 10% or more, depending on the country the code are using. So clearly, there's still many things to be done in that regard. So if you can move to the next slide. What I was saying is that before is that there's been actually over the last 15 years, 2 major streams of investment in payments industry. We try to summarize this here. One that was really about making payments faster and cheaper, domestically and internationally. Then domestically, fair to say that with the development of faster payments first in the UK, but then now in 75 countries, you do have today real-time domestic payments infrastructures that makes payments in a second. Excellent experience as well when it comes to that. So it's great to see that, right? Even at cross-border level, SWIFT, for instance, has made tremendous development with initiatives like GPIs and others, but you see also the emergence of new payments platforms like the Wise and others that have also contributed to make cross-border payments a lot faster. Is it perfect? Is it real-time yet internationally? Not really, but it goes actually into the right directions. The other major streams of investment has been about making payments, the customer experience better, and that is about making them simpler, seamless, more secure. Development of domestically about a certain number of value-added services, what we call overlays, have contributed to that, right? Like, for instance, request to pay, or like proxy payments, or paying actually through a QR code. All of that has made the experience actually domestically a lot better. But is there, when it comes to cross-border payments, any kind of interoperability mechanism between all these domestic value-added services? Effectively not, right? And that is what actually we should be doing as financial institutions, is to create this interoperability mechanism that can make the customer's experience a lot better. And that's what we do at iPay. If you can move to the next slide, it is really looking at a certain number of those overlays and try to interoperate them in between the different countries. And the first thing we've been doing to that regard is to look at account validation. Typically, can we ensure that somebody is paying to the right person or is paying to the right company when it comes to corporate payments as well? And we look at interconnecting in one side clients and in the side actually location where we can access the data and validate information that is crucial to ensuring when you pay to the right person. Today, iPay is covering already 10 major corridors. We can validate about 2.3, 2.4 billion accounts in the world. We don't believe that this is actually the solution that will actually stop any kind of frauds, or that there will be multiple solutions, but clearly this one we believe will certainly contribute to make the experience of international payments a lot better. We see also, as you mentioned, Nigel and John, that there are a certain number of countries that from a regulatory point of view are moving ahead with this. Obviously, UK with the confirmation of pay is a new scheme that has been developed, but you have heard also that some of the countries like in Europe, there are no project about mandating account validation for each and every payments, or real-time payments first, but then every other payments in the future. Countries like Australia moving ahead, Japan's moving ahead. So I think there is some kind of agreement across the board that it is a solution that eventually will help diminishing the level of fraud and also enhancing the customer experience. So that's all I want to say at this point of time, and eventually I will now move to, you will move to Heidi. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Alan. That's very informative. Guillermo, over to you.
Thank you, John, for inviting me. Thank you all the sponsors as well for organizing this webinar and giving the opportunity to corporate treasurers, which I humbly represent all the Treasurers Association to speak on this webinar. First of all, my point is just is maybe an obvious sentence, but victims are victims. I mean, there is no last name for victims. One victim, old lady in a small village is the same victim than a young boy in a big town. So for me, or for all treasurers, we are victims as well. The same that all the Nigel cases explain. So we are also victim of scams, and we need protection. We need protection as well. So I think this is something I want to highlight, and don't try to make a distinction between victims and protect all on the same umbrella if possible. Of course, some victims need more protection. I'm not arguing about that, but I think the regulation should also embrace the corporate treasurer, the multinationals as well, even though we are supposed to have more resources. But anyway, I think that's my first point that I wanted to be clear. And then I think I'm gonna go through what instant payments means for corporate treasurers at this point in time. Obviously, is a very early stage. Not many peers I know that they using the instant payments so far, but we are convinced that it's gonna be the new normal in very soon, and that's the reason corporate treasurers being engaged with the regulator, with the European Union officials to make this instant payment ecosystem more robust and more safe. So at the end, will bring a lot of adoption from corporate treasurers, as of course from individuals. We already seen how the traction is is being in place. John showed how the instant payment is taking and gaining the market share in the payment environment. So for us, as I say, we need to create a robust systems, and that's the reason we are participating with the European Union to make it happen. Very glad to see that the European Union is going to introduce what we call a extra safety net, which is the confirmation of payee or the IBAN name check. And this is for us really an important milestone. And we think that the confirmation of payee is very important for corporate treasurers, because if you can go back to the previous slide, John, our main threat, our main risk in corporate treasurers is the business email compromise, which means the impersonating a person trying to trick us with an email, with a bank account, a change in the bank account, with a invoice that is being intercepted, or with the scan of our system. So this has been proved to be the main threat that we are facing. And that's the reason we focus on that to minimize and to mitigate our risk. And that's the reason we believe that using the confirmation of payee or the bank IBAN name check that will help to reduce that risk very drastically. So I show you a very simple example where you can see how easy it can be. Obviously, it's not so easy because the fraudster has access to all the invoices which are due. He knows exactly the payment dates. He knows how many invoices are going to be paid in the next payment cycle. So he knows also the address of our main contacts. So it's very, very, very difficult, even for us and for treasurers like me with a lot of experience in treasury, to really differentiate between a fake email and an authentic email. So that's the reason we need help, and we need help from the financial institutions and the regulator as well. That's what we are doing, but we need the help just with this IBAN name check, and that's the reason we are forcing and advocating very, very strongly, not just for instant payment, where the battle seems to be gained, but we also now starting making amendments to the PSD2 directive, which is the directive for payments in force now in Europe, and there is a revision that is going to take in. There's a review that is going to take in place now, and where we're going to really start again to make our voices to hear to the regulator, and introduce the confirmation of payee again, which not only for instant payment but also for the standard payment, and also of course the cross-border payments, which is going to be the next battle. Just the last example in the next slide, please, is just something that just happened in this year, where we can see that the court is giving reason to some claims from corporate treasurers for corporates, where they start claiming that the bank are not acting as they should do, and there is already one case which has been won, and could be a precedent, and could be a potential game changer. So we're looking really forward the next claims that are already in court, and we think that that's going to be more and more cases like this, and that's the reason we really want to work with banks to implement a confirmation of payee as soon as possible. And of course, we we do the same. We're trying to influence on the regulators and the central banks to make this happen. So I think at the end it will be a more safer, a safer environment for making payments for corporate treasury, and that will be, of course, the way we will switch from standard payments to instant payments in the future.
Thank you very much. That was very good. Andy?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, just tying the three previous speakers together, like Nigel, I had a payment to make not so long ago. I purchased some cars from auction in Japan. Everyone knows me, knows that I'm a car nut, and I had a guy that I've worked with for years who became a friend of mine, and saw the cars in auction. He purchased them through his company, and then I had to pay him. First challenge, obviously, my bank didn't have Alan's IPID solution, so trying to make a payment to Japan, where it has to be written in hiragana through the Japanese was a nightmare. And then when I made the payment, I got a call from my bank, a big UK bank, and they said, "Oh, what's this payment?" I said, "Oh, it's a car in Japan," and basically they refused to pay. And after a number of telephone calls, they asked me all these questions, and I explained that I checked the invoice, Guillermo. It was a proper invoice. I'd spoken to the gentleman who'd done it all. And basically, it was just the end of COVID, towards the end of COVID. And the last question the person from my bank said was, "Have you physically touched and seen the car yourself?" And I said, "Well, no, because I'm in England and it's in Japan." And they said, "Well, we're not going to honor the payment." Now, this would have been a nightmare for my friend in Japan, because if you buy a car at auction, you can't just change your mind and not pay. And the auction may have stopped doing work with him. So my solution was just to send it to my fintech bank in the UK, which happened immediately. And then I sent it from my fintech bank to Japan. So an extra step, it cost me a little bit more money. But yeah, it was a real friction point that caused me trouble. So, you know, as much as we are trying to prevent the fraud, the actual pain to people who can't conduct business because the frictions there sometimes can go too far. My little slide here was really just talking about the typical peer-to-peer payment in the current situation. Currently, like with the faster payment, fortunately, we are all using devices, tablets, and laptops now when we log on to make a payment. And now your bank is going to send that payment, has a lot of checks it can do to confirm that, first of all, that it is you that is running that account. And the key for that is strong customer authentication. And when I mean strong customer authentication, I don't just mean Face ID or equivalence. That's just really proving that the person who's got the device can unlock that device. It doesn't mean that that is the same person that opened that bank account. There are solutions out there now, and some banks are doing it, where the actual ID document that's used to set up that account, the image on that is checked with a live face selfie to ensure that, you know, proper biometric solution to ensure that it is you who opened that account that is making that payment. Likewise, there's lots of intelligence around that device, maybe the battery level, the geosensor, you know, how the device is being held, how you're being typed. All these type of device intelligence and behavioral biometrics can also be used. So there's quite a lot of intelligence on, you know, that person is the person sending the payment. And the bank also has the ability, if it looks unusual, you know, doing behavioral anomaly checking, to contact you, ask you the questions like Nigel had, to really confirm that that's happening. However, the recipient, your sending bank may know nothing about, and you yourself as a sender may know nothing about that recipient. And this is where the real challenge with APP fraud has happened, is not having the information on the sender, but really having good intelligence of the recipient. And that's a huge problem right now. If you go to the next slide. What request to pay as a alternative, and again, this is in the peer-to-peer, not so much in the corporate request to pay, Guillermo, but in the request to pay model, there's the ability that when the requester logs on and looks at that to send that request to the payee, that receiving bank can do the same sort of checks that you would have on a sender. they can confirm that the payer is controlling that account, that it isn't a mule account or an account takeover scam. They can use the same sort of device intelligence, the same type of behavioral analysis, and the same sort of capabilities to do a kind of equivalence check on that recipient before that request to pay hits the sender. And how does this help? Well, it doesn't then go against the Supreme Court's ruling that if a payer, insists the payment is made, that you can stop it, because there is no, I believe, court ruling or sort of legal precedent to force a bank to allow a payer to send a request to pay request. So anyway, in this situation, you have the payer then at the recipient's bank. All those checks are done. Then when that request to pay hits the sender's bank, that it can almost be like a verified check mark to say, yep, we've done the customer check. It is that person that owns it. It is looking like a normal behavior for that recipient. So then the biller has a lot more confidence, and the sending bank and the receiving bank have more confidence that that payment is less likely to be fraud. Would it cure fraud 100%? We know that it wouldn't, but I think that at least with this situation, you have the ability for both the seller and the receiver to have received the same sort of checks to have more confidence in that payment. So, I'd be interested to see if this happens, and it may be in the future if image of the payer, so the same sort of biometric image that you may have in a QR code could be sent to the sender to show that the person you're receiving the payment is actually this person. And I think that would also help. And combining that with something like IPID, I think could be an absolute game changer.
Thank you, Andy. That was very good. Can we have a summary? When you take a look at it, digital is for all. So we have both good and bad actors going. And as Gilmore said, we're all vulnerable, because at that moment in time when I get lots of fake calls, and sometimes you start going along and you say, wait a second, it's a fake. And it's really tricky to collect it, especially when it's small amounts of numbers. You go, oh yeah, just pay that away. We need action both on the individual and collectively people. That's needed. By 2026, instant payments will become the global norm. You can see faster payments, and you can see what Europe's doing. And I think with the UK, with its staff and its laws, can influence the world in making APP, domestic and international payments, much better protected from being misdirected and scammed. So I think that's good. Thank you for the panel. Now we're opening up for questions. And I got a question for all the panel, which I think this is from Dan Fihani. Hopefully I've said your name right. And he asks about, will AI come into play, both the benefits of AI and also the negatives of AI? And I'll start with Nigel. You haven't said anything for a while. Nigel.
Well, the obvious answer to the question, of course, is yes, in as much as, for example, the best example I think I've got is the mule account case I was involved with, where this account was opened by a relevant bank, one of the big four, down in South London. The guy opened this account, and the bank followed its account opening procedures correctly, asked all the right questions, and one of the questions was, do you see a need for any dollars or foreign currency accounts? To which he replied, no, I don't. And then 6 months later, he went into the same branch and opened a US dollar account without a buy your leave or a thank you. The bank didn't question anything with regard to what information they had when he first opened the account. And of course, this was a mule account. $5 million came into the account, and on the same day, $5 million left the account. So based on what was just being said with regard to the previous speaker, I think AI could be very useful, because it could stop this sort of thing happening quite easily. And another example I've got is which I was involved with, once again with Barclays, where the company that was defrauded and started sending money to a fraudulent bank account, they didn't go after their bank at all. They went after the beneficiary bank, Barclays, and Barclays settled out of court on the court steps. So there is a lot to be said for being able to, for the banks to be able to use AI to make sure that if money does come in, they know what it's for and can stop accounts being credited if needs be.
Oh, very good. Alan?
By the way, just to add to it, it's the sort of thing that banks did long before computerization.
I agree with that, because I was in payments at Citibank, and one of the clerks questioned this payment, and we found out it was wrong. It was wrong in that it came from another bank, and we had to say, you've got to order us to pay it, which they did do, and it turned out to be a fraud. But it's interesting because we had somebody there to pick it up.
The other thing in my experience is that one of the problems with banks themselves is that the account managers are only too keen to follow customer instructions because their performance is based on the income which they generate. And therefore, if they've got an instruction which is going to generate some income for them, which means that they will get a decent pay rise, etc., then they just let the payments go through.
Alan?
Yeah, but listen, my instinct will tell you that, yes, I mean, AI eventually could help partially or totally fixing the problem, right? But let's not forget at the same time that AI is above all based on data, right? That's what it uses, right? And data that you can globalize and bring all together. And I think actually when it comes to preventing fraud, that's what we're talking about here today. It is also about defining ways in which you can exchange essential data for the right purpose, right? And it's actually one of the trigger or actually one of the things that the European Commission in its new regulations about real-time payments is considering. What they say basically is that sharing information about the payee is actually a necessary compromise against, of course, around data privacy, to actually finding the right way fraud. And I think that the combination between newer technologies like AI, but also combined with the right access or the right way to sharing data that are essential to prevent fraud is the solution to go, right? Somewhere also what Andy was saying when it comes to request to pay is about that, right? Is actually you have somewhere a mechanism that shares data of the payee as well on the way back to ensuring that you're paying the right invoice to the right person, right? So that is also one way to go. Obviously, when it comes to sharing data, you need to have also the right mechanism or the right structure, the right standardization that allows this. One of the reasons why today request to pay doesn't really work is that there is no real consensus about the scheme that you need to develop. Scheme also meaning that the kind of data you want to share and the way you want to share it to make it possible, right? So yes, technology on one side is important. On the other side, actually, data is to me even more crucial.
Yeah, and just to add to Alan's point, AI is an absolute must now, because already we are using digital authentication, and we're already having instant payments. So an example of that would be, we know it's the deep fake voice scams, deep fake images. So they are there designed to trick a human being. If you have a celebrity and a celebrity lookalike, it can be difficult for a human to know which one is which. If they turn up a passport control, maybe they would be allowed through. AI is not going to get tricked with a lookalike. Say what a computer sees through an AI model is completely different to what a human eyes are seeing. So if we're going to have the bad actors already have access to AI, you need AI to defeat it, unfortunately. So, I mean, I think a biometric check is the ultimate example of how AI already exists today, and we're using it on our phones and our computers. So, yeah, I think it's an absolute must. But, currently, the prevention tools are there. There is no AI sort of villain that can beat the computers currently. So we just need to stay on top of that and make sure we have the necessary controls in place.
And very good. Guillermo?
Yes, I can say that we're seeing a lot of data behavioral data analysis already in many corporates that are developing tools to prevent fraud. I think, of course, this I very focus on the confirmation of PG, IBAN name check, because it's a easy one, but I fully agree we need to look for new possibilities like AI or data analysis. Of course, that they are already some solutions in place, and I think there's a lot of more to come in the coming years.
I think that's very good. Last question again for the panel, and we'll go in reverse order. This is from Rob Lewis. It's about privacy data enhancement technologies. And the question Rob is asking the panel is, do you see the bank's willingness to support new technologies that could they be adapted to prevent fraud? Guillermo? Is the bank's desire, do you see the banks adopting new technology?
Of course, no. I mean, we are not arguing that at all. I mean, banks are, of course, developing new technologies. I don't have any doubt about it. But also, banks need to make money. They need to make money, and they need to reduce costs, and that's also. When you invest in technologies, you spend money, and sometimes that can be a paradox, but that's the reality. So I think banks they like invest in technology and bring new technologies to customers. But I think also from our side, I mean from the corporate treasury side, we need to also push banks to bring what we need. Sometimes we don't need certain technology, but we prefer to use another one. So I think it's our role as well to push and make clear to the banks what we need, and what we need is in priority. And I really think that the role of the Treasury Association is to channel all those desire or those willingness from the corporate treasury and bring it to the banker and make sure that the banker understand what our needs and they invest in the technology that we need. I think this is very important, and I think again, as you mentioned in the summary, of course, this is again, we have to play all together. I mean, if we want to defeat or not to lose too many from Froster, we need to work together and just bring ideas, bring new strategies on the table, and work together instead of fighting among us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Andy.
Yeah, I would just say that I did absolutely interest from the banks to develop more and more technologies, but obviously the larger the bank, there's 100 priorities there, and every time payments, as Alan will tell you, is globally critical to how we live every single day, and putting new capabilities, new elements of friction or new a simple task. Then you have to look at the inclusivity of what you do, the impact downstream. So it's easier for the more fintech banks to adopt these when they've got a technology by design to be very flexible and easy. But for the larger banks, the ones that most of us retail bank with, it's not an easy task to bring something on. It can take years. So there is willingness, but there's a lot of priorities they have to compete with.
Very good. Alon?
Yeah, a bit of the same thing, right? I mean, we, as you can imagine, actually, in our role at IB nowadays, actually, we're meeting with a lot of banks, right? Actually, we're meeting with banks, fintechs, any kind of payments platform, right? And actually, when it comes to investing in new technologies, what I see is, yes, willingness, but it's also being driven by what I would see 4 main criteria. And it's a criteria which is about definitely bringing new actually functionalities, new kind of products to the clients. That's one. It's also, and I think Guillermo mentioned that as well, actually reduction of cost. I mean, they're investing in new technology because in a way, actually, they believe that eventually they can remove people and doing this actually in a much more automated way than before. So reduction of cost is very key. There's also a reason which is about the technology they're using is actually outdated. They need to keep upgrading what they have and moving to newer technologies. Otherwise, what they do is not going to be sustainable. And finally, there's regulatory change as well. Right? They're forcing to move into new technologies because actually a regulator is asking them actually to do things that today with what they have, they cannot do. And ultimately, what you see and what we see, and also in trying to persuading the banks or any other financial institution to using IP, there's always this kind of a prioritization exercise they have between the 4 criteria that I mentioned in here. And yeah, there's other priorities sometimes that comes up that actually are prevailing to the other one as well. And clearly what we see is that the first key priority they have is regulatory change. If the regulator is actually coming up with something new, that will definitely pushing actually some priorities on new technologies ahead. And then second one also is about technology, aging technology. Sometimes they cannot actually, if you have a major provider like I just mentioned, like Microsoft, that tells you actually what you have is going to be updated in a year from now, they have to actually to invest rapidly to keep the system sustainable. So that's the way it's happening, right? But to be fair with the banks, they're really investing into this. They're looking at AI, for instance. They're looking also at many other things to be sure actually they can actually provide their clients with the best possible service.
Very good. And Nigel?
Well, when I worked for or was a member of the Association of Foreign Banks, I was a member of the management team for confirmation of payee, which was a project which involved all the major banks in the UK and took something like 10 years to come to fruition. So that was a good example of how banks do not work very well together. And if I go back into ancient history, there used to be a bank called Midland Bank, which during the 30s was the largest bank in the world. During the 60s, early 70s, they had a project called Project 70, which never ever went live. So the history of banks and their IT projects, I don't think has been anything for banks to be particularly proud of over the years. And I hope that over the coming years that they will understand technology a lot better than they have in the past.
Thank you.
So that's my biased view.
No, not at all.
Not shared by me.
I'd like to thank the panel, Nigel, Arne, Andy, and Guillermo. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and
Thank you.
see you soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.